been interesting times for the headlines. Thousands of Hong Kong protesters, including many high school students, formed human chains outside multiple subway stations to protest against city leaders using a colonial-era emergency law to ban face masks at protests as the city enters a 20th consecutive weekend of protests. Nearly 200 people were hurt in another night of violent clashes in Catalonia, according to authorities, after radical separatists hurled rocks and fireworks at police who responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. Hundreds gathered in Lebanon for a third day of protests against tax increases and alleged official corruption after the security forces made dozens of arrests. Chile's president declares a state of emergency in Santiago and gives the military responsibility for security after a day of violent protests over an increase in the price of metro tickets. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and now to the news. Anti-government protesters defied face mask ban while forming a human chain in Hong Kong as the government struggles to end the political crisis. Take a look.
Some people may think that human chain is not useful, but I think this is a way to gather our opinion and so that we are united to support the so-called Yongmo. That means the front line in the protest. At the beginning of the protest, we tried to march peacefully at June and July, but the government did not listen and tried to pass the law. So we have no choice but to use certain degree of the so-called violence to make the government respond, but still they do not try to respond back.
And that's why I'm wearing this mask, because just to show my anger towards the government, and especially just after the release of the policy address, and you see Carrie Lam just keep on blaming the problem as a housing problem, and it is definitely not a way to address what we are really concerning. Just like the 5 demands, she never really answered those questions. So that's why I'm here today to show our anger. Peaceful protesters is going to maintain, it's going to continue, and maybe there are the violence may escalate because as the government keeps reflecting our concerns, and I think people have no choices but to escalate the violence to grab people's attention and to force the government to give in.
The peaceful event comes ahead of a mass rally that organizers are planning on Sunday to press their demands. Now, police have refused to authorize the march, citing risks to public safety and order. But protesters have previously ignored such rejections. The ban sets the stage for possibly violent confrontations between police and protesters worried about China encroaching on Hong Kong's special status. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam said the ban on masks, which have become a hallmark of the protests, is aimed at deterring radical behavior. Offenders can be punished by up to a year in prison. Meanwhile, violent clashes escalated in Barcelona late on Friday as radical Catalan separatists hurled rocks and fireworks at police who responded with tear gas and rubber bullets, turning the city center into a chaotic battleground. Take a look. Around 500,000 people rallied in Barcelona. 500,000 people rallied in Barcelona, according to police, in the biggest gathering since Monday's court ruling, as separatists also called a general strike in the major tourist destination. But while most marches appeared peaceful, hordes of young protesters went on the rampage near the police headquarters, igniting a huge blaze that sent plumes of black smoke into the air as police fired tear gas to disperse them. Now, other fires raged near Plaza de Catalunya at the top of the tourist hotspot Las Ramblas, where hundreds of demonstrators rallied in defiance of the police, who tried to disperse them with water cannon. Now, earlier, many thousands of freedom marchers who had set out to walk from 5 regional towns on Wednesday arrived in Barcelona wearing walking boots and carrying hiking poles. The rally coincided with a general strike, prompting the cancellation of 57 flights, the closure of shops, business and several top tourist attractions, and slowing public transport to a trickle in the region that accounts for about a fifth of Spain's economic output. Activists also cut off Catalonia's main cross-border highway with France. Now, the deterioration came on the 5th consecutive day of protests in the Catalan capital and elsewhere over a Spanish court's jailing of 9 separatist leaders on sedition charges over a failed independence bid 2 years ago. Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez warned that those who commit illegalities during the demonstrations in Catalonia will have to answer for their actions, while independence fighters from all over Catalonia converged in Barcelona for what promises to be the high point of their mobilization against the indictment of their leaders by the Spanish courts on Friday. Take a look.
La regla es muy clara. Quienes cometen una ilegalidad responden por ello, más pronto que tarde, pero responden, y que nadie tenga la menor duda. No habrá ningún espacio para la impunidad ante los hechos vandálicos que hemos visto durante estos últimos días en algunas ciudades de Cataluña.
Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri addressed his country on Friday night from Beirut, officially giving Parliament 72 hours to approve his reforms agenda. This after a massive protest raged across the country, demanding the resignation of government officials. Now, he blamed his political opponents for blocking reforms to resolve the economic crisis and issued a 72-hour deadline for them to cooperate. Otherwise, he hinted that he may resign.
إما شركائنا بالتسوية وبالحكومة بيعطوا جواب واضح وحاسم ونهائي بيقنعني أنا وبيقنع اللبنانيين والمجتمع الدولي والكل يلي عم بيعبروا عن الغضب بالشارع اليوم إنه في قرار من الجميع للإصلاح ووقف الهدر والفساد، أو بيكون إلي كلام آخر. برجع بقول مهلة قصيرة جدا، ولازم هالكلام يكون واضح للجميع. وإذا عم تسألوا شو هي المهلة قصيرة جدا، 72 ساعة عشتوا.
The heavily indebted Lebanese government unveiled several new measures to raise revenue in an attempt to balance their large budget deficit on Thursday, which helped spark the protests. They included a tax of 20 cents per day for calls made through the voice-over internet protocol, such as WhatsApp and Facebook calls. Now, the government scrapped the proposal within hours, but demonstrations carried on into the night before security forces dispersed them at dawn on Friday.
وعطرونا. أنا عندي 5 أولاد، عندي 3 بلا مدرسة، ما قادر أعلمهم. يعني الشعب إذا ما نزل على الأرض هلا وبأسرع وقت حيضلوا يعملوا عليهم ضرائب وتراكم لمدى الحياة.
Now, banks, state institutions, schools, and universities were closed on Friday as the rally spread throughout the country. Reflecting the scale of public anger, rare demonstrations were reported in neighborhoods dominated by powerful Shiite movement Hezbollah, not used to opposition in its own bastions. South of Beirut, travelers trying to reach the airport had to leave their luggage behind, hitching rides on scooters and clamoring over roadblocks. Thousands of people of all ages, sex, and political affiliations had brought the capital to a standstill, with demonstrations reported across the country. The protesters are now demanding a sweeping overhaul of Lebanon's political system, citing grievances ranging from austerity measures to poor infrastructure. Meanwhile, Chile's president declared a state of emergency in Santiago on Friday night, and he gave the military responsibility for security after a day of violent protests over increases in the price of metro tickets.
He decretado estado de emergencia en las provincias de Santiago y Chacabuco y en las comunas de Puente Alto y San Bernardo en la región metropolitana. El objetivo de este estado de emergencia es muy simple, pero muy profundo. Asegurar el orden público, asegurar la tranquilidad de los habitantes de la ciudad de Santiago, proteger los bienes tanto públicos como privados y, por sobre todo, garantizar los derechos de todos y cada uno de nuestros compatriotas.
Now, throughout Friday, protesters clashed with riot police in several parts of the city, and the subway system was shut after attacks on several stations. Violent clashes escalated as night fell, and the Enel Power Company building and a Banco Chile branch, both in the city center, were set on fire, and several metro stations hit with Molotov cocktails. The unrest started as a fare-dodging protest against the hike in metro ticket prices, which increased from 800 to 830 pesos, or $1.17 for peak hour level, allowing a 20 peso rise in January. Attacks on metro stations forced the closure of the entire subway system, which is the key form of public transport in the congested and polluted capital, carrying 3 million passengers a day. Now, the Santiago Metro, at 140 kilometers, the largest and most modern in South America, is expected to remain closed this weekend and could reopen gradually next week. Closure of the metro forced many Santiago residents to walk home, sometimes long distances, resulting in scenes of chaos. Nearly 20 pro-Pyongyang South Korean students broke into the U.S. ambassador's residence in Seoul on Friday, displaying banners demanding Harris leave the country in an embarrassing security breach. Take a look. Now, the students broke into the compound in the center of the Capitol by climbing over the wall. Pictures they posted on Facebook showed. Now, they said they were protesting against Washington's demands that Seoul increase its contribution to the cost of defending the South. The U.S. stations 28,500 troops in the country to protect it against the nuclear-armed North, which was invaded in 1950. A police official told AFP 17 students were taken to police stations for investigation after breaking into the ambassador's residence. The South's foreign ministry condemned the students in a statement, saying that any harm or attack on foreign diplomatic missions cannot be justified under any circumstances. The student group involved has previously said it would welcome North Korean leader Kim Jong-un if he visited Seoul. The U.S. Embassy didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. The Russian Emergencies Ministry said at least 15 people were killed as a result of a dam failure at a gold mine in the Siberian region of Krasnoyarsk early Saturday. Take a look. Now, Regional Governor Alexander U.S. said in television remarks that some 80 people lived in the temporary settlement south of the city of Krasnoyarsk. Investigators said separately 14 workers were hospitalized. More than 270 people were involved in a search and rescue operation, according to the emergency ministry. Investigators said they opened a criminal probe into the violation of safety rules. The World Health Organization said it still sees the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo still warrants being classified as a global emergency. Take a look.
The Emergency Committee has recommended that the current Ebola outbreak continues to pose a public health emergency of international concern. I have accepted that advice. So far, we have received half of the money needed to maintain response efforts to this outbreak. That puts health security across the globe at risk. In addition, funding for preparedness in surrounding countries is grossly inadequate. This is dangerously short-sighted and frankly difficult to understand. If we fail to prepare, we're preparing to fail. We must fix the roof before the rain comes.
The Ebola Emergency Committee recommended that the FIC be maintained, the public health emergency of international concern, because the battle is not over yet. And as it was alluded to, we must remain cautious. There might be setbacks. And for me, this outbreak is like a marathon, and the last mile is always the most difficult.
If we continue to drive as well as we have over the last 2 to 3 months, and if we continue to chase the virus and get ahead of the virus, then I believe the outbreak will come to an end. It will come to an end 42 days after the last confirmed case. So let's try and push towards that.
Marking the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said, ending extreme poverty is at the heart of the world's efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and build a sustainable future for all. Reading a statement on behalf of the UN Secretary General at an event to commemorate the day, senior UN official Daniela Bass said that the focus of this year's commemoration is on acting together to empower children, their families, and communities to end poverty as it falls during the 30th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. According to the UN's 2019 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, released in July, more than 1.3 billion people around the world live in extreme poverty. Nearly half of them, a total of 663 million, are children, and 22%, 428 million, are younger than 10. The Global Multidimensional Poverty Index covers 101 countries comprising 5.7 billion people, which is about 76% of the global population, and looks at how people experience poverty every day. MPI considers whether people are healthy, have access to clean water, or have been to school. The UN estimated that more than 886 million people who are living in multidimensional poverty live in middle-income countries.
Ending extreme poverty is at the heart of the world's efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and build a sustainable future for all. But success in leaving no one behind will remain elusive if we do not target the people who are farthest behind first. Children are more than twice as likely to live in extreme poverty than adults. Poverty condemns many children to lifelong disadvantage and perpetuates an intergenerational transfer of deprivation. Today's children will also live with the devastating consequences of climate change if we fail to raise ambition now. One of the key to ending child poverty is addressing poverty in the household, from which it often stems. Access to quality social services must be a priority, yet today, almost 2/3 of children lack social protection coverage. Family-oriented policies are also indispensable, including flexible working arrangements, parental leave, and child care support.
Meanwhile, British MPs gathered on Saturday for a knife-edge vote on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, for a decision that could see the UK leave the EU this month or plunge the country into a fresh uncertainty. The Parliament was holding its first Saturday sitting since the 1982 Falklands War to debate the terms of a divorce agreement Johnson struck with European Union leaders on Thursday. Opposition parties and Johnson's own Northern Irish allies have rejected the text, but the Prime Minister and his team have spent the past 48 hours frantically trying to win the support of wavering MPs. The vote is widely seen as too close to call, but Prime Minister Johnson warned his deal was still the best way out of the tortuous Brexit process that has left Britain in political turmoil since a 2016 referendum.
And with permission, And now is the time for this great House of Commons to come together and bring the country together today. As I believe people at home are hoping and expecting, with a new way forward and a new and better deal both for Britain and for our friends in the EU.
He has renegotiated the withdrawal agreement and made it even worse. He's renegotiated the political declaration and made that even worse. We're having a debate today on a text for which there is no economic impact assessment and no accompanying legal advice.
The Prime Minister... Mr. Speaker, I must confess that I am Speaker. The ambition for our future friendship is contained in the revised political declaration in lowering standards. Instead, whatever letters they may seek to enforce force the government to write, it cannot change my judgment that further delay is pointless, expensive, and deeply corrosive of public trust.
This deal is not good for jobs, damaging for our industry, and a threat to our environment and our natural world. It's not a good deal for our country, and future generations will feel the impact. It should be voted down today by this House.
Meanwhile, British citizens in London shared their opinions on the upcoming Parliament vote on the Brexit deal with the EU. Take a look.
To be fair, I think the vote will go through. I think Boris will get his majority. I obviously hope it doesn't, but I think it will. Because I think it's important to be heard. Since the referendum, I've been very sad about leaving Europe. I don't think it's good for next generations. I don't think we're doing future generations any favours by leaving Europe.
I hope that we stay in the EU, but I think that we're going to crash out and we're going to leave. There's going to be Brexit, but unluckily, I think there will be a no-deal Brexit.
I want Brexit to occur. Yeah, I'm not overly positive about it, but the vote was done. Whatever the arguments, I think it's important for democracy that that the vote is carried through, the referendum vote is carried through, for good or ill.
Too long, there's a confusion going on too long. Now, at last deal, they have to sign it.
And before we go on a break, U.S. astronauts Christina Koch and Jessica Meyer on Friday became the first all-female pairing to carry out a spacewalk, a historic milestone as NASA prepares to send the first woman to the moon. Take a look.
Thanks so much for spending time.
The pair began the walk with standard safety checks on their suits and tethers before making their way to the repair site on the station's port side as the sunlit Earth came into view. Now, the first all-female spacewalk was supposed to take place in March but was cancelled because the space agency had only one medium-sized suit. A male-female team performed the required task at a later date. The failure by the traditionally male-dominated NASA to be adequately prepared was denounced in some quarters as evidence of implicit sexism. Now, when Koch and Meyer had been outside the space station for about 5 hours, President Donald Trump reached them in a video call and told them they had made history. Take a look.
I just want to congratulate you both. You're very brave, brilliant women, and you represent this country so well. And our country is very proud of you, and we are very proud of you. Millions and millions of people are watching you right now, but I will tell you what you do is really something very special.
Now, the first woman in space was Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova in 1963, followed by compatriot Svetlana Savitskaya in 1982, who was also the first woman spacewalker 2 years later. Ken Bowersox, NASA Acting Associate Administrator, said he hoped that an all-female spacewalk would soon be a routine matter that would not require celebration. Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Trace, thanks.
When visiting the Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. Some of the species that you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
Welcome back. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and Indian President Ram Nath Kovind signed 4 bilateral agreements covering maritime domains, security, tourism, science and technology, and culture during the 5-day state visit in the country of the Indian leader. The Department of Tourism and Indian Ministry of Tourism signed a memorandum of understanding to enhance cooperation in the tourism and hospitality sector. The Philippine Coast Guard inked an agreement with the Indian Navy to enhance maritime security through the sharing of information on non-military and non-government shipping vessels between the two nations. A program of cooperation in the fields of science and technology for 2019 to 2022 was signed between the two countries' science and technology departments. The last deal signed was a cultural exchange program between the two governments for 2019 to 2023. Let's listen in.
These cover bilateral cooperation as well as regional and global issues of the day. Today we have signed 4 agreements covering maritime domain, security, tourism, science and technology, and culture. These would further intensify our cooperation. We have decided to explore both our common future through cooperation in space as well as the past through research of the history of our civilizational roots and commonalities in our culture and tradition. We look forward to receive experts from the Philippines to India to research and document our ancient links. In all these areas, we are cooperating in one way or the other, and the potential for this is enormous. There is immense potential to further deepen the Philippines-India economic ties. I look forward to address the India-Philippines Business Conclave and the 4th ASEAN-India Business Summit tomorrow.
The day when we set out to turn promise into reality and potential into concrete benefits to bring the greatest positive impact on the lives of our peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, the era of some zero games and the us versus them approach to world affairs is over. What we need now is open and inclusive cooperation based on mutual respect and sovereign equality. Hence, just as India is deepening its presence in our regions to the Act East policy, the Philippines is also expanding the boundaries of its diplomacy in pursuit of a truly independent foreign policy as mandated by our Constitution.
In other business news, Asia faces a significant growth slowdown with forecasts for 2019 and 2020 calling for the slowest growth pace after the global financial crisis, according to the International Monetary Fund. Take a look.
Growth softened in the first half of 2019, driven by a large decline in fixed investment and export. Looking ahead, Asia is expected to grow at 5.0% in 2019 and 5.1% in 2020, which is the slowest growth pace after the global financial crisis. Meanwhile, inflation across Asia is projected to remain subdued, reflecting softening demand.
Good morning, everyone.
Meanwhile, the IMF also said China's lowered growth estimates are having an impact on the whole region.
Largest economy. You're right, the Q3 GDP numbers for China came out and they showed that growth had slowed to 6.0% in the third quarter, down from 6.2% in the second quarter, which is broadly in line with our WEO baseline forecast. In this year's WEO, we forecast China's growth to slow modestly to 6.1% this year, 5.8% next year. This growth slowdown reflects several factors, including the escalation of trade tensions, the global slowdown in manufacturing and investment, but also the strengthening of financial regulations in China, which has helped keep growth on a sustainable path.
Meanwhile, India's slowdown of recent quarters is improving.
We believe India still has a limited fiscal space, so they have to be careful. We actually think they support their consumption, the corporate income tax cut, because it has a positive impact on investment. But on the other hand, India has to address a continued fiscal consolidation and secure the long-term stability of the financial fiscal conditions.
And reinforcing the IMF's focus on climate change, Rhee noted that Asia is especially vulnerable to climate change-linked weather events and needs to take action.
In many countries, Asia is definitely the most vulnerable region for this climate change. And then also this climate change issue, not just a global issue. In many countries, we are now facing the quality of life is really deteriorating. China, definitely air quality recently is even improved, so big questions. And if you look at the many infrastructure, flood in Thailand, and whenever the rain comes, all the traffic congestions. And recently, in even advanced economy like in Japan, we are not very safe. So there is an immediate need for each country to address this issue. Third, also historically, it's not our fault, but at this moment, it's true. We cannot deny that the largest emissions are coming from Asia.
It is a tougher call.
And the International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and other finance and trade experts gathered at the IMF for a debate on the global economy. Now, much of the talk focused on how to counter what Georgieva has called a synchronized slowdown in the global economy, as well as how to ease trade and geopolitical tensions. Let's take a look back.
The global economy is now in a synchronized slowdown. Fractures driven by trade, driven by uncertainty surrounding geopolitical tensions and Brexit, they're holding back growth and they're causing hazards in this shared road we are traveling on, they're slowing us down.
Now, Ms. Georgieva also said that measures taken after the global financial crisis have reduced risks of shocks, but advanced economies are struggling with flat productivity and yields. This has brought two consequences.
Guess what? If you are in the business of making money, you actually want to make money. So we see more risk-taking, we see weird things happening because the normal pathway to generate yield is not delivering in advanced economies, delivering a little bit better in emerging economies, and I'll come to that point. But the second conclusion I drive is that we do have to concentrate much more forcefully on why productivity has leveled.
Now, panelists urged a turn toward more trade rather than protectionism. News of possible progress between the U.S. and China was welcome but brought some skepticism. Take a look.
The negotiation reached a certain degree of consensus, which is good just a few days ago here in Washington. But you know, in Washington, things change very fast. Like weather changed also very fast in the past few days. So I don't know. I mean, we still have to see whether we'll be able to ink the negotiation into the paper in a month in APEC meeting.
Could we hope to get a
And Spanish Minister of Economy and Business Nadia Calviño said countries should not engage in tit-for-tat tariffs and threats.
It's lose-lose. Is this good at the end of the day? Well, obviously it isn't, you know, it's lose-lose. So we are very supportive of engaging in a constructive manner, finding a better way to deal with each other, a more constructive way to deal with each other, a rules-based world trade. You know, it doesn't mean that we don't need to change anything. The WTO needs to be reformed. We're very willing to engage in that process, but threats and raising tariffs doesn't seem to be a very wise solution for me. So patience, yes. Is that enough? I frankly doubt it.
Thank you very much for watching and for tuning in internationally.
When governments have the sort of huge power that is represented in the comprehensive biometric national database, we would want some very strong protections. But there are very big, as we know, rule of law issues in relation to a lot of the countries that are moving in this direction. Is there any realistic right of appeal? Can you challenge the sort of determinations that are made? The most important probably is who gets access to what data and to what extent is all the data combined into a single database. So should you have the tax records, the health records, the motor vehicle records, the property records, the criminal law records, and credit ratings, etc., all into a single database, which begins to resemble something of the Chinese social credit system that is apparently evolving. That creates enormous opportunities for abuse, even if authorities say, no, it won't be used for that purpose. We're not regulating big tech effectively, but nor are we insisting on appropriate regulation of welfare tech, if I can put it in those terms. In other words, to try to limit the sort of data that's collected. There should be a sort of necessity requirement. Why do you need my irises? Why do you need this particular data? And once you get them, how are you going to use them? and what are the restrictions. So the private sector is heavily involved in a lot of these, what I call digital welfare state developments as well. And that's another aspect that needs to be controlled. We need to get more transparency. Brings me into a much bigger issue that I touch on in the report, which is that the big tech companies continue to insist that they are not bound by human rights standards. They continue to lobby very hard with the US Congress and everywhere else to ensure that they are not subjected to human rights type standards. And what we've seen is that the big tech leaders have consistently dismissed the existence of any universal values. They will consistently say, but there aren't any universal values, so we can't use those to guide ourselves. We have to develop this ourselves. But of course that denies the fact that every country in the world has ratified a large number of human rights treaties, that the great majority of them have human rights in their constitutions, etc. Doing some dodgy things.
Now, special rapporteurs and independent experts are appointed by the Geneva-based UN Human Rights Council to examine and report back in an unpaid capacity on specific human rights themes. They also make annual presentations to the General Assembly Committee dealing with human rights issues, known as the Third Committee. Major European players are joining forces to block Facebook's proposed digital currency because of the dangers it poses to national sovereignty. This is according to French Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire, announced on Friday. The group of 20 economies also warned of serious risks of money laundering, fraud, and illicit finance posed by Libra, the social media network's proposed digital currency. Italy, Germany, and France will take unspecified steps in the coming weeks, quote, to show clearly that Libra is unwelcome in Europe, Le Maire told reporters on the sidelines of the annual meetings of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in Washington. He said, we will not allow a private company to have the same power, the same monetary power as sovereign states, he added. The major difference between Facebook and governments is that we are subject to democratic control, that is the control of the people, he said. The group of 7 economies on Thursday had said any reserve-backed digital currency like Libra, known as stablecoin, would require a sound legal framework before entering circulation. But European officials say they want to go even further by blocking the currency outright. Libra also has faced challenges from within as major financial and commercial players in recent weeks backed out of the project, including Visa, MasterCard, eBay, Stripe, PayPal, and the online travel firm Bookings Holdings. Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
Net25 shows live and on demand anytime, anywhere on any mobile device Onos and Play.
Hi guys, I'm Marie Francisco here at the Shoe Museum in Marikina in the Philippines, reminding you to watch Digital News every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 p.m. And I am 1 for 25.
From fierce typhoons and tight budgets to losing its dancers to cruise ships and theme parks, Ballet Philippines has weathered almost every type of storm. But as it celebrates its 50th anniversary, the renowned arts organization is determined the show will go on. Funding is difficult to secure, and there is little money for necessities such as dancer salaries or even shoes. But more than 30,000 people watched the troops' productions last year. No mean feat in a nation where millions live on less than $2 a day. Now, one of the biggest challenges is keeping the dancers it has trained. Some go on to join world-class organizations. Many leave after being poached to perform on cruise ships or as characters at Disneyland who can offer 50 to 100 times what they make at Ballet Philippines. Principal dancer Denise Parungao, who started out as an $40 a month apprentice at the troupe, says she relied on family to help pay her rent and understands why others left. The same grit is evident down even when it comes to the use of dancing shoes. In big-name companies, a performer might go through 4 pairs of ballet slippers in the course of a single performance.
Dancers abroad, they use 1 pair a day. It's the this in the Fried of London. That shoe, they use it 1 pair a day. And in Ballet Philippines, a dancer wears that for the whole month. They put glue, they varnish, they do everything just to make it last.
Now she buys an extra 5 pairs a year out of her own pocket to make sure her footwear doesn't disintegrate during a live performance.
The strength of the Filipino dancers in the Hong Kong Ballet while I was there was the fact that we do not only dance, we embody the roles that we are tasked to portray. So we're natural hands. We love to act. We love to entertain. Walang hiya-hiya.
Though it has always had free use of the National Cultural Center's facilities, the company only gets about $40,000 a year in government backing. Part of the success of Ballet Philippines has been the determination of its performers. In 2014, a fierce typhoon knocked out power and floods left the orchestra stranded miles from the venue. But with 2 hours before the show started, the organization decided to carry on so as not to disappoint audiences who had traveled for the show.
Filipinos really have more heart in doing whatever. So, since it's very difficult for us, everything about ballet, we give our whole self to it.
You feel a certain fulfillment when you see a dancer for quite a while and she or he would just be a second player, and one day you would see her just fly there on stage like a dream.
And the names Ouch, Super Bien, Le Vandals, Algorithm, or Spectre Lab might mean nothing to the general public, but they're among the digital artists looking to get the jury's nod at this Paris festival, which has attracted contributors from France, Belgium, and Turkey. Take a look.
L'objectif, c'est vraiment de montrer au grand public ce qui se fait aujourd'hui dans les arts numériques et notamment dans le digital design immersif, c'est-à-dire de la création graphique par ordinateur à l'aide de projections et de montrer ce qui se fait de mieux, entre guillemets, en France et à l'international via cette compétition que l'on organise pendant une semaine à l'Atelier des Lumières. On a 140 vidéoprojecteurs, on a 50 sound speakers, ça représente entre les murs et le sol, c'est 3300 mètres carrés de surface projetée et pour aller encore plus dans les détails, c'est un peu plus de 3 milliards de pixels.
And celebrating reading and literacy, the Word on the Street event highlights Canadian writers and publishers. Raisa Mangilit reports from Toronto.
Best-selling author Neil Gaiman once said, "A book is a dream you hold in your hands." If that's the case, then this weekend Toronto is filling up with hundreds of dreams, as today the city holds the Word on the Street Festival, an annual and national celebration of books and magazines, of writing and reading.
The Word on the Street Festival is an annual outdoor festival that hosts Canadian authors and writers and a marketplace that features books and magazines published here in Canada. This year, the festival is held here at the beautiful Harbourfront Centre, closing off the summer season with best offerings of the Canadian publishing industry. The WOTS Festival celebrates its 30th anniversary with its biggest features to date: 200 Canadian authors, 120 events, 16 stages, and 265 exhibitors. The festival program includes children's literature and activity tents, Indigenous author readings, writing workshops, panel talks, and Canada's largest marketplace of books and magazines.
We've actually been attending Word on the Street for many years. I want to say close to a decade, probably, that we've been coming. It's a great way, as an independent publishing house especially, to be able to put ourselves in front of the readers and introduce our books to them. So my husband actually founded the press, and he is a poet, and he realized when he looked out into the Canadian publishing landscape that there wasn't a lot of presses that were publishing poetry or work that was of a more experimental nature, and so that's why he was prompted to start the press. And this year we're actually celebrating our 15th anniversary. Oh, well, it's great. I mean, it's definitely an industry that has many challenges, as do many industries, I realize, but it's a very exciting time as well, though, in Canadian literature, I think, especially as there's been a lot of movement in the last few years to publish more broadly, publish voices that have been historically underrepresented in our publishing landscape, and our press is really committed to that. And so I've been very excited to see the growth of that across the industry, and I'm really happy to be able to contribute to that as well. I think one of the biggest challenges as an independent publisher we face is discoverability. I mean, there is just a lot out there, and how do you bring dialogue, discussion, or attention to your books? So that discoverability factor is an ongoing challenge, but one that we certainly try to rise to. Yeah, and I think that that's probably something that most independent presses would agree with.
According to the WOTS, their mission is simple: to create a free public festival celebrating reading and literacy in Toronto. For 30 years, this is what the festival has exactly done and continues to do. This year, the WOTS Festival features celebrated Canadian authors such as M.G. Basanji, Maureen Jennings, and Cory Doctorow, and upcoming authors like Casey Platt, Alicia Elliott, and Sherry Demeline.
Storytelling is universal, which makes reading and writing vital in human lives. In Toronto, Raza Mangilit, Eagle News, I'm 1 with 25.
And that's the news for today. I'm Alma Angeles. Join us online. We'll see you again on Monday. I'm Alma Angeles, always 1 with 25. Good night.
For one weekend every October, Open House New York has been giving New Yorkers access to residences, facilities, and cultural spaces to appreciate architecture and design.